Reddit users, tell me about the spookiest thing you've seen in Second Life that no one believes you were working. The late shift at a convenience store. Almost no one enters the store from around 10:45 until we close at midnight. The store is set up so that I'm about 6 feet from the door in front of me, to my left, and directly above it are two. It's a tiny store with security monitors that cycle through a few different camera angles in the back, right outside the front door, in the lot, and in the shed by the coolers, and then repeat the cycle. I'm working alone with my phone when 11 o'clock strikes, and there is probably a 20-minute silence before I look at the security monitor, which shows the angle of the lot, and it displays people's backs as they enter the front door. Since it's fairly dark outside, the best way to determine whether a customer is arriving is to watch the cameras. There's a small delay, so I would see something on the screen a second or two after it actually occurred. And when the lot's angle returns, I see a man from what I look down at the front door, which is just below the monitors, and no one was there. I assumed it was a glitch, possibly an old tape replaying. So I watched through another cycle of the camera angles, which lasts about 45 seconds, to see if it would happen again halfway through the scene. Behind me, a black man, not very tall, let alone wearing a jacket, is holding a grocery bag in his right hand. Cycle, the door opens, and a young, black man who is not very tall and wearing a leather jacket enters the store. He is carrying a grocery bag in his right hand, and the cherry on top is that he didn't make any purchases instead. He just looked around for a minute, as if his mind were playing tricks on me, but I was so terrified that I didn't work any more nights after that. One time, when I woke up at 6 in the morning, the door to the office at my house crashed open, and I saw something happen on the security monitors about a minute before it actually happened. Because of the weight distribution, it naturally opens slowly and takes around 8 seconds to fully open. But it was 6 in the morning when it blasted open as if it had been forced. I was too exhausted for any ghostly since it was winter, and there were no windows open to make a draft, and everyone was asleep. I urinated and went back to sleep, but I wasn't in bed because I got up to go to the restroom instead of the office door, which is visible from my bedroom entrance. My girlfriend and I were staying at a very dilapidated Airbnb, and since the building was very old, I was trying to frighten her. I called out, "If there's a ghost," and the door slammed shut. 2 seconds after I said that, we were both silent and unsure of what to do. This was probably a coincidence, but it was still enough too. At my parents' house, I heard shuffling noises and said aloud, "Look, let me sleep. I'm really tired and have to be up in 6 hours, so I'd appreciate it if you'd be quiet for a bit." At that moment, I was terrified when I noticed a shadow snake climbing my armoire and cuddling into the corner of my room, almost like a reclusive ghostly snake. The situation in the living room reminds me of a school night when I was around 15 years old. I recall waking up in the middle of the night and checking the clock. It was around 1:30 a.m. To bring some hot tea to bed with me, I walked to the kitchen. At this point, our kitchen was connected to the dining room, which was a step down from the kitchen. The kitchen and dining room shared a wall with large sliding glass doors and windows that looked out onto the backyard. The cabinets where we kept the tea were on the other side of the window wall, creating a small nook. I recall entering the kitchen with the lights off and making my way to the tea corner. Then, I felt as though someone was watching me through the kitchen windows and sliding glass doors. So I stood there for a minute or so, very still, thinking that perhaps they wouldn't notice if I didn't move. I then returned to my room without making the tea, and when I got there, the clock read 5 a.m. My mom never believed me when I told her that I had been standing in the kitchen for 3.5 hours, and I had no idea how that was possible because it felt like only a minute. To this day, it remains the most bizarre thing that has ever occurred to me. Our home, I never did either, but that night I did. A similar story about time loss on Reddit revealed that it was caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. I had severe insomnia and possibly undiagnosed schizophrenia in high school, but I would fall asleep night after night and wake up in the middle of school tests just before. The idea of being able to get up, get dressed, usually keep the same clothes on, shuffle out the door, and go through to classes unconscious is terrifying. And on top of that, is the reason I usually snap out of it. I had no idea how I got there, panicked that I only had 10 minutes left of the test, and didn't know what I had written down. About a dozen times, I had different pairs of socks, had no underwear, or had my shirt backwards. This was a classic high school nightmare scenario where I was taking a surprise test and had to check myself to make sure nothing was missing. My test scores were fine, but some of my answers were strange and caused my teachers to get upset. To recommend therapy to my parents because I still have nightmares about these incidents. When I was younger, I would occasionally see a man wearing a top hat in the basement of the house where I grew up. My mother didn't believe me and said I was just dreaming, and when I was a teenager, she accused me of using drugs. When I told her that I had seen him, she said I hadn't. I saw him again when I was in 15 years later. The question still haunts me today: who or what did I see? About 10 years ago, in my early 20s, I woke up in the middle of the night after sleeping with the door closed. There was very little light, like the power lights on gaming systems and the glow from the lights on my laptop that was still running, with a few Windows servers running. It was several feet beyond that, behind the door, darker than the darkness, and I couldn't tell if he had a hat. He seemed to be wearing something substantial, like a full bodysuit or coat, and he was crouched, watching me from the side. His eyes were red, like the spot, and he had a cheap laser pointer pointed at me. I was terrified and couldn't take my eyes off of them. I estimated that he was between 12 and 15 years old. Eventually, I believe I simply passed out from exhaustion, and I knew I had seen someone mention something similar before. I looked a few times over the past few years, but I was unable to locate anything until this thread. My father died of cancer in 2006 after a protracted illness, and the night before his death, my nephew got into some trouble in Hong Kong. Kong was returning to the Netherlands, but first he had to check in with my uncle. When he arrived at the airport hotel, my father gave him a nice, big dose of painkillers to ease the transition, but he refused to give up and was delirious, mumbling things all the time. In the end, we went to bed at around 2 a.m. Around 7 in the morning, my nephew checked in with my uncle. The following morning, my mother and father were sitting together alone as my father opened his eyes and exhaled his final breath. At that point, my mom attempted to call my uncle, but he was occupied with my nephew. It seemed as though my dad wanted to wait until my nephew was secure in the hotel before he would die. Every time I tell this story, people won't believe me when I say it's a strange coincidence. But I don't think coincidences exist anymore after that. I spent more than 20 years living at my parents' house, and during that time, I became quite familiar with the house's stairways, doors, and floors, which are among the spookiest things that I heard footsteps coming from the other side of the house. One day when I was by myself, I was so accustomed to the sounds of the house that I was able to identify the footsteps and tell that they were approaching the stairs. Then I heard the top stair squeak, and then the fourth step down made a noise. It has a very distinct sound. Distinct thought. Then the sixth, then the eighth. I was positive that I was by myself, and the hair on my arm stood up straight. I was on the verge of getting up and running out, but I wanted to see who or what it was. When the footsteps finally reached the bottom, I was still standing there, staring into the hallway where the steps led, and there was nothing but that feeling you get when your eye felt like I was being watched. As I looked down the hall, but no one was there. Perhaps this was just a trick of mine, but a lot of weird things have happened at my parents' house. For instance, my dad claimed that one night when he was there by himself, he woke up in the middle of the night and heard heavy breathing coming from the other side of the room. My mom said that one night she felt something pulling at her hair, thinking it might be the cat. But when she felt around the bed, she discovered that the cat was asleep at her feet. She had a girlfriend over, so she stayed the night. The following morning, while we were eating breakfast, she asked where my nephew was. I asked, "What do you mean?" And she replied that he doesn't want to join us for breakfast. I said, "I'm really confused." My girlfriend had a very perplexed expression on her face and said, "No, I saw him last night. He stood in the doorway to the guest room and saw that I was in the bed that he usually sleeps in. It's Saturday morning, and he's probably still asleep. Why would he come over and join us for breakfast?" My experience with the footsteps occurred 22 years ago when I was attending college. I assumed he went downstairs to sleep on the couch, and we all just sat there staring at each other like, what the? You don't have any crawl spaces in your walls or ceiling, do you? There's a crawl space beneath the house, and the attic door is in my parents' bedroom. I'm 99 because I asked my brother to assist me in running Cat 5, and we did so through the attic without finding anything unusual. It's entertaining to turn it into a ghost story, but we've tried to be 99% certain that we didn't have a squatter living in the attic. I've always thought it was my imagination and that it was just the house sinking. Reasonable about the strangeness. My parents had to fill in a well on the property when they built the house. We've looked into the lot's history, but so far we've found nothing. When it rains, old medicine bottles wash up in the dirt, but my parents kept the intact bottles and stored them in a china cabinet. We joke that it's a poltergeist that used to reside there. A block party was being held at one of the houses on our street 5 or 7 years ago, and the street was lined with cars on both sides. I was almost to our driveway when I slammed on my brakes because I thought I saw a small girl, dressed in all white, with dark hair, hunched down with her hands over her ears. She was about 3 seconds after. I've never told anyone about this before because I was positive. My mind was playing tricks on me. My daughter was at a sleepover at a large multiple occupancy property, which is similar to a community, but everyone had their own house, and there were a few abandoned houses that the girls, all of whom were around 12 years old, entered. I applied my brakes and flashed my brights to get a better look, and she was gone. The only one who did well was my girl, who heard a noise and turned to see a girl with bluish skin and black hair standing there, dripping wet and staring at her. She claimed the noise was like water dripping, and she fled. Her friends all said she was lying, with the exception of one who could see how genuinely afraid she was. Later, I asked around and discovered a girl who I'd like to know more about my girl's experiences when she was a toddler. She said, "I've grown up and see ghosts often, but that's the first time she ever saw anything like that, and definitely the scariest. Does seeing ghosts often like that one experience suddenly set off all the others? Or is she just perceptive of the paranormal?" She had previously lived there in the 1970s and drowned in the river. I didn't give it much thought until she asked me a few times where her other mother was. I didn't know what she was talking about, but she insisted that she had another mother, my black mother, which was strange because she probably wouldn't have realized that some people are described as black at 3. She claims that they look like real people, not ghostly, but she gets a feeling. And when she's with other people, she'll ask if they can see them too. Naturally, her friends or boyfriend will respond, "Nope, there's no one there. I can't see them either." I know that many people would assume that she's making it up or that it's, but she doesn't. And that's not how she is. Some experiences, like the one when she was 12, really scared her, and she doesn't like to think about them. My mom has some of that kind of sense too. My sister and I are 11 years apart, so by the time I was about 4, I knew what a sleepover was. At this time, I had terrible nightmares every night. I was also a daddy's girl and would run to him for comfort, but he worked. I have a lot of stories about them, and she will probably see this too, because I just told her to check out this thread. Third shift, and would frequently just be going to bed when I would cry because of these nightmares. When I would wake up, my parents would question me to see if I was getting better or worse or what the dream was about. One morning, I came into the living room, and without being asked anything, I started talking about a man who had a sleepover with Dad. I told them I went to get my dad after having a nightmare, but the other man was sitting at the edge of the bed and told me, pressing his fingers to his lips, "Daddy's sleeping. Go back to bed, sweetheart." I seemed really happy about the man, so they didn't really press, just relieved that I had a good night at last. However, I also talked about him for a few days. After a few days of my bringing up the man, my mom decided to ask me some questions about his appearance. They don't share a bed, so she took me into his room and sat me down before showing me pictures. "Is this who you saw, Mom's dad? Are you sure it's a man? Could it be her mom's mom? No way." My dad took the same test a few days later as well. I suppose to make sure I wasn't hopping from person to person and everything. Every time one selected my grandfather, Every picture I was shown was of all deceased relatives, and I've never had the opportunity to meet him. However, about her dad's mom, nope. What about him? Dad's dad, yeah, that's the man I saw. That's what I thought my dad said. When I was 13 or 14 years old in Arizona, we were traveling to Flagstaff to visit relatives, and as we drove at night, I swear I saw a dog running next to the car. I didn't really pay any attention to it at the time, but I still get signs from my grandfather that he's around and watching over me. I stopped having nightmares after I met him. I told my parents about it, but they said it was impossible and that I was just having a bad dream. No, you didn't have a bad dream. I was an atheist and a strong believer in science until I saw what I saw. First, though, I looked at my dad and noticed the speedometer reading 85. I looked back out, and the figure broke off from the vehicle and headed out into the desert. Explanations such as the existence of skinwalkers or the creation of a human SL-coyote hybrid are all implausible, but I saw what I saw. I wasn't exhausted, intoxicated, or tripping. I looked for and investigated all possible explanations, and the only one that seems reasonable to me is that there are things in this world that my current science cannot explain, but they might be explained in the future. However, they do exist. I apologize for my poor English, but please explain what you did. It's so corny that it could have been lifted from a horror film. Called A Road Near the Sonoran Desert in Baja California. The car was a Land Rover, but it was a model that I've seen a lot of in my native country. This is unimportant, but I can still clearly recall the car. This model wasn't even common in the US. We had to stop because there was a dog, coyote, in the middle of the road. As we got closer, we slowed down and honked, expecting the dog to flee, but the larger it appeared, the more we halted. The night was dark, and I was the passenger. The driver was a 42-year-old man who was essentially Ukrainian and had no gods except his wife, lol. Appeared to be sleeping, but then abruptly turned his head to face us. Keep in mind that there were only 10 to 15 meters between us, and its face was not in a dog face. Rather, it resembled a cross between a Neanderthal and a dog, if that makes sense. It stared at us before abruptly standing up on two legs, resembling a werewolf like those seen in movies, and was no less than over 2 meters tall. The driver performed the most abrupt and swift turn I have ever seen, and then he fled us. The thing chased us for a while, but obviously failed, but it was swift, and we were screaming and other variations I can't recall the entire time. We kept going until we reached the next gas station, where we filled up the tank. It was about 50 kilometers away, and after an hour and a half, I believe we started talking. We both agreed that we had seen the same thing, and I had nightmares for months about it. I still think that if what I saw that night was real, there might be other things that I've always thought of as being from fairy tales and legends. And that's amazing, and frightens the out of music me. One evening, as I was standing in my kitchen, the garage door opened and closed. I thought my husband was attempting to get me to go outside with him while he smoked. So I went to see how the kids were doing and returned to the kitchen to find him in the bathroom. The door then opened again, and someone entered wearing a full white bodysuit, his hair bright red. And I knew not. He said he was just looking for a place to stay, but I told him that was inappropriate. His eyes darted around the room, and he kept coming back, shushing me and saying it was okay. I yelled my husband's name, and since I don't usually use that tone with him, he left right away. When he saw the man in the bathroom, he asked what was wrong. He then pushed me aside, ran around the counter, and screamed at him to get out. The man insisted that everything was fine and that he only needed a place to stay. He continued to try to enter the house. Thank God the kids were asleep, but my husband lost it and pushed the man even harder. The man kept asking why my husband was so cruel, so he shoved him out of the garage, found his small axe in his toolbox, and chased him down the driveway. He was coming back, so he shoved him to the garage access door and kicked him in the chest as hard as he could. But the man got up and tried to come back in, so my husband, who now had the high ground, kicked him again. The man in the street kept begging my husband, and my husband was shouting at him, "You're lucky I couldn't grab my gun. You could have been killed." Both of us were extremely relieved that my husband was unable to grab his gun. because the man was clearly on something, and it would have been terrible for him to die that way, not to mention for our children to find out about it. You would think that the police would have a bad record of dealing with escaped mental patients, or something similar. Still, I know that many people object to keeping doors locked all the time. Still, it's stories like these that make me happy that I live in a very safe neighborhood with very little crime. But that doesn't stop someone who is abusing drugs or even just having a mental illness from waltzing right into our house. We keep all the doors locked in the house. Still, since it was a Friday night and my husband smokes in the evenings, he had the garage open. We no longer do that, lol. In addition, while stargazing, my mom and I noticed a space battle, and we believe it must be a satellite or a shooting star because we saw a star move across the sky. As it reaches a certain point, it suddenly shoots a thin, rapidly fading beam of light from itself in a diagonal trajectory to the one it had been maintaining. At the point where the beam ends, another star that had been stationary starts to move quickly away from the first shooting star, and we can see that the original shooting star has also changed course. We believe that what actually occurred was that we saw a shooting star, a meteorite, move towards us and deeper into the atmosphere at an angle that made it appear to be moving parallel to the ground. And then at some point, the contact occurred, away from the newly moving one. It essentially appeared as though a spaceship conducted a drive-by shooting on another spaceship that had been stationary. For a brief moment, the meteorite was broken by the atmosphere, and a smaller fragment shot off in a different direction, revealing a stream of fire. However, when the fragment changed angles, we lost the stream or concealed it from us, leading us to believe that we were witnessing a previously stationary star start to move after being struck. But it was actually in any case, it was a lot of fun, and who knows? Perhaps we saw a super-secret U.S. starship shoot up another super-secret. The fragment itself probably changed its angle as it fell and gained luminosity. Due to burning in the atmosphere, we unconsciously assumed that we had seen it before as a non-moving star, or confused it with one of the several other stars in that area of the sky. Chinese starship. I was camping in the woods when a huge dragonfly landed on my thigh. It was black and red, so it was definitely a dragonfly and not a tarantula hawk or something. When I try to explain, people say I must be exaggerating or forgetting stuff, but they also say it must be. The body was proportionately thick, but it wasn't just longer. You see what I mean when I say that no one believes me because I work in entomology. And it's unlikely that you saw something that large for a wide range of reasons. I've seen dragonflies do it, but I've also seen dragonflies do it. This will be the millionth time I've said that when discussing this incident, ranging from physical constraints given the current CO levels to the fact that it's difficult to overlook something that large. I constantly remind people that insects are thought to comprise almost 80% of all species, but we've only found 25% of them. Thank you for sharing. In the mid-1990s, I lived in Boise, Idaho, where the majority of the city was made up of abandoned dry. One day during school recess, a couple of my friends and I were hunting grasshoppers. It must have been late August or early September when we heard a loud sound of wings, and a foot-long, bright orange grasshopper landed about 5 feet away. My friends and I exchanged glances, wondering how we were going to photograph this moment. But the three of us cautiously approached the enormous grasshopper, and we were only 3 feet away when it took off again with a loud WH. I've never seen anything like that since, and no one believes me. I once had a nightmare in which I was brutally murdered. However, this was a dream, so I don't remember specifics. It ended up in the bathroom, where I bled out over the sink. When I went to the same bathroom in the morning to casually urinate, the sink was covered in dried-up blood. I've concluded that I must have had a severe nosebleed or something during the night, and simply don't remember it. I was working mids and doing a weather observation between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning m. Many lights started to travel through the sky more quickly than I had ever seen before, almost too quickly for me to follow. They couldn't have been a shooting star or an airplane, and they came to center on the horizon, vibrating for a few seconds. It was supposed to be decommissioned the year before, but they put more duct tape on it and ran it for another tour. which resulted in no air conditioning off the coast of Haiti and fuel in the water supply. Good times, same cruise for me, my friend. Don't worry that the water was safe to drink. It was seconds and shot out of the sky, still the strangest thing I've ever seen. My sister has seen things on multiple occasions throughout our lives, but I have never really seen anything. I have only heard it very clearly. Basically, one night, everything went as usual. My dad was watching a comedy movie with my sister and me, and my mom was out with her friends watching a game. We all went to bed laughing about it, and I was lying in bed. About 30 minutes after we had settled in to read a book, I heard someone stomping downstairs in the hallway and then running up the stairs. I assumed it was just my sister returning from getting a drink or something, but since our doors are next to each other and the staircase is just around the corner, I would have seen her leave her room. I was waiting and watching as they seemed to be in a hurry. The footsteps going higher and higher up the stairs, but as soon as they reached the top, they stopped completely, leaving nothing behind. My mom was returning home, and for some reason, my door is angled so that I can see anyone coming up the stairs. When I woke up to see who it was, I turned the corner and saw no one. I instantly got goosebumps all over my body and tried to figure out what could have happened. Less than 2 seconds later, I heard my sister yelling, and she ran out of her room, her face full of terror. Without hesitation, we ran into our dad's room, where he was already standing, asking what's wrong, and my sister points back to her room while sobbing, saying, "There's a man." My dad rushes into the hall and turns the light on, and then turns the light on in her room. He checks the closet and behind everything, but finds nothing. So he enters my room and does the same, but finds nothing as well. We spent the next 15 minutes or so holding his hand while he searched. We all slept in my dad's room that night, and over the next 7 or so years, my sister had fled her room, crying about the same man, saying he just stood there. He calls my mom to check if she's been home, but she says she's still with her friends. I could even hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone speaker. There in the corner, he observes her. She described him as a very tall man wearing a trench coat and a top hat, like a detective. She said that everything was entirely black. A few years later, I discovered what is known as the Phantom Hat Man or the Top Hat Demon. It turns out that this phenomenon actually exists, and every description and illustration matches exactly what she said the day I saw. When I was 3 years old, Hat Man just stood there and watched me until I screamed the house down. He then followed me and my dad downstairs, but my dad didn't see him. Instead, he faded out on the stairs. Whether it was a night terror or a dream, my son has seen him multiple times, and until recently, I didn't realize it was a phenomenon. He would wake up at night and see the man standing in a corner of his room. If I remember correctly, my friend and I used to blame everything we had in kindergarten on something similar. We called him Mr. Nobody. I'm not sure where we got the idea for him, but your story reminded me of it. He was standing on top of his toy box, staring at him while wearing a dark cloak and a top hat, and occasionally the clock was covering his head. A tall man in a trench is similar. A fedora-wearing cat.